Hi, this is your host. In our recent video about droughts, we got a lot of comments pointing out that beavers can help prevent floods. So we decided to make a whole video about that. In some ways, beavers are like little ecosystem engineers. As they build dams, they create wetlands, which hold water from rainfall and snowmelt, and then slowly release it into the surrounding landscape over time. This helps to reduce downstream flooding. In other words, beavers help prevent floods by building dams. But this is not always the case. Sometimes beavers can actually cause flooding, and in some rare cases, they can cause massive flooding. So when does it work? And when do beavers cause flooding? When beavers build dams across small streams, they can create areas of wetland habitat that hold excess water and gradually release it over time, preventing downstream flooding. The dams also create deep pools that provide habitat for all sorts of aquatic life. So while beavers can sometimes be a nuisance to humans, in many situations they are actually beneficial because they help prevent flooding and improve biodiversity. A study published in Nature Climate Change in 2013 found that beaver dams can capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it for decades. The study looked at 2 sites in the Rocky Mountains in the United States, one with beavers and one without. Over the course of the experiment, the researchers found that the beaver-dammed area was able to store much more carbon than the controlled area, mainly because the beaver created deep pools that captured organic matter such as leaves and soil, which then decomposed and produced methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, but it has a relatively short lifespan in the atmosphere, whereas carbon stored in deep water can remain sequestered for decades or even centuries. One of the challenges of the study was that it was difficult to measure the amount of carbon stored in the beaver dams themselves. This is because beaver dams are constantly changing as the beavers add new material to them and move existing material around. However, the researchers were able to get an estimate by taking cores of the dams and counting the number of tree rings in the wood. This gave them an idea of how old the different parts of the dam were and how much carbon they were storing. The researchers estimated that the beaver dams in their study area were storing about 4,800 metric tons of carbon per square kilometer. That's about 4 times more than the control area. The dams were also storing about 1,500 metric tons of carbon per hectare per year, which is equivalent to the annual carbon emissions of about 300 average U.S. households. Another study published in 2015 in the journal PNA has found that beaver dams can help mitigate floods by up to 65%. This study looked at a watershed in Colorado that had been heavily modified by humans. The researchers used a computer model to simulate how the watershed would respond to a large flood event both with and without beavers. They found that the beavers were able to reduce the peak flow of the flood by up to 65%, and the total volume of water that flowed through the watershed by up to 25%. In this example, the beavers were able to reduce flooding by slowing the flow of water and giving it time to soak into the ground, rather than running off downstream. This is in contrast to the more commonly known effect of beaver dams, which is to raise the water table and create wetland habitat. However, this does not always happen, and it depends on a variety of factors, such as the size and location of the beaver dam, the type of terrain, and the amount of vegetation in the watershed. So there you have it. Beavers may not always be welcome, especially when they decide to build a dam on your property, but they do play an important role in flood prevention. And by doing so, they also help to prevent droughts by creating wetlands that can store water during heavy rainfall and snowmelt, and then gradually release it over time. If you enjoyed this episode, we would appreciate it if you could give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends. You can also subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on all of our latest episodes. The studies and references used in this episode are listed below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.